Okay, in this episode, I'm going to be talking about the difference between sport protection training and real protection training. And I'm going to throw in a little bit of police work training as well. This is a suggestion that was brought up to me by a follower on Facebook. So I think it's a great topic to talk about because it is one that is commonly misunderstood. So, Calvin, thank you very much for this suggestion. I'm going to dive right into it. Okay. So, one of the reasons that I feel comfortable talking about this is I've been doing protection training since really the beginning of my career. That's how I got started into the industry. It wasn't by training pet dogs. It was right from the get-go. I started working with protection dogs. And primarily personal protection and police dog training, so patrol dogs. And then after that, that's when later is when the pet dog training and the additional experience came along, and the actual sport experience, something that I've really dove into in really the past 3.5 years. That's when I actually got into the protection sport aspect of protection training. Because up until that point, I hadn't really competed. I hadn't really done any sports. It just wasn't my area. It wasn't my area of expertise. It wasn't my field. And even now, I wouldn't say that it is my area of expertise, but I've gone into it in such depth because I want to be good. I want to learn. And I find that I'm actually learning. I'm doing pretty well. I'm doing pretty decent. My club is doing pretty well. And we've worked with dogs from different breeds, different backgrounds, different genetic traits, or different pedigrees. And so club's still kind of young. Club is maybe about 3 years or so. And we've had a kind of a nice fluidity when it comes to members coming and going, helpers, mentors that I've had along the way. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about that, but the bottom line, the start of this episode is basically to tell you that I do have a lot of experience with protection training and patrol dogs, and now recently in the past 3.5 years or so, protection sport training. And I know that there is sort of sometimes some misunderstanding, but also just the unknown. People really don't know, what's the difference between protection sports, protection training for real protection work, and maybe some police work. I'll maybe spend a little bit of time in that too, because I have trained a bunch of police dogs early. It was the first school I went to. That's the type of work that I was involved in. There was a lot of that is something that I did daily. So I'm gonna start by giving you an analogy. Okay, I like to use analogies because they're very useful to illustrate something to a person who is familiar with the analogy that I'm going to use, but maybe not so familiar with the subject that I'm trying to put a light on. So let's think of protection training as fighting, okay? Just the analogy is going to be fighting. This is just a simple analogy that I like to use that I think does a pretty good job at painting the picture of what I'm trying to say here. Let's say you teach a person who doesn't know how to fight, or a child that doesn't know how to fight. You tell that child, hey, kid, let's teach you how to fight, okay? So what's one way we can do it? We can, you could do it yourself if you know what you're doing. If you know how to fight, you could definitely do it yourself. Or maybe you and your buddies can get together and you and your buddies have experience fighting, experience being the key word, and then now you grab your child, and then now you and your buddies can teach your kid the fundamentals of fighting. Or maybe you have a specific style. Maybe your background is more on taekwondo or boxing, or maybe you don't have a whole lot of experience in that. So you take your child to an academy, to a school where they do one of those sports, or they do either Krav Maga, or they do taekwondo, or they do boxing. Okay, so let's just take this child through that progression. Whatever approach you take, whether you take that child to that formal academy, that formal school, or you do it yourself because you know what you're doing, you're going to go through some basic things about fighting, right? Some basic things. You're going to teach the child how to make a fist. This is basic stuff. I'm not saying that one style is better than the other, but you're going to teach that child how to make a fist. You're going to teach that child to protect his face. You're going to teach that child how to strike. Okay? You're going to teach how to rotate that fist to give a strike. Okay? And you're going to teach him how to hold the fist properly so that the thumb is outside of the fingers, not inside of the fingers where the child will punch and now the thumb is going to get jammed. I do have a background in taekwondo, and I did get into a lot of fist fights when I was a kid. So I have a little bit of an experience with that analogy that I'm using. So you're gonna teach that child how to jab. You're gonna teach that child how to cross. You're gonna teach that child how to do an uppercut. So these are some basics. You're gonna teach that child how to have the proper stance. Okay, and it doesn't have to be sports specific. It could be, all right, Jimmy, when you are fighting, kind of be light on your toes, and don't get stiff. Hands up. You're gonna have your fists ready to go, and this is what a jab looks like. You're gonna have that child practice the proper form on how to do a jab. Okay, this is just an example. And so let's say you progress that child, and let's just say now that maybe you're doing taekwondo, maybe that's your background, or maybe you're taking them to an academy where they do taekwondo. So what's going to happen is that child is also going to learn how to maybe do a kick, how to do a front kick, how to do a push kick, maybe how to do a side kick, and a round kick, all of that, right? So the child is going to get those basics. The child will probably also learn how to do some grappling, right? How to do some evading, some dodging maneuvers, how to block. These are basic things. Now, you could say that as this child or this adult who's learning how to do this, they're acquiring a skill, and that skill is how to use their fist, how to strike properly, how to do damage. Okay? Now, as this person progresses, you could say, hey, Jimmy, you've been doing taekwondo for this many years. You can go to this, this little, maybe not even years, maybe like a few months, maybe a year or so. And then you could say there's a little, demo, or there's a little tournament, and we signed up little Jimmy to go to that tournament. Now, based on his skill, based on his preparation, and based on the work that his mentors have done with this child, that will be reflected on the mat when they go to this tournament. Now, bear with me, okay? I know this is about dog training, but really try to stay along. Try to stay with the analogy. So let's say little Jimmy does great. He does awesome, right? He actually does great. He has some pretty quick strikes. He gets a lot of points and does amazing. Now, let's say little Jimmy goes back to school after about a year or so of doing constant training in martial arts or boxing or whatever, and that kid goes to his regular school, right? Not the martial arts academy. He goes to his regular school, and then a kid tries to pick on him, and he tries to bully little Jimmy, or our subject here. And little Jimmy, of course, is going to try to do the best he can to avoid confrontation, because that's one of the disciplines that you learn doing martial arts. But when escape is not an option, what's going to happen now? Little Jimmy is probably going to be in that situation where now he has to use his body. He has to learn the skills. Okay? So here's where I'm going to stop for a second, and I'm going to ask you some rhetorical questions. I want you to think about these questions as you're listening. Do you think that little Jimmy is in a better position to defend himself because he's had about a year or so of martial arts training? Do you think he's in a better position to defend himself in a real fight, since he's had this formal training, than he did prior to that? What is the answer? The answer is probably yes, right? He's had several months, a year or so, maybe even more, of formal training where he's done this 3 times a week, where he's learned how to strike, and he's done hundreds of repetitions. He's done hundreds of blocks. So he is in a better position to do well in this actual fight. Okay, he is in a better position. Now here's the next question. The fact that little Jimmy took about a year worth of martial arts training, does that guarantee that little Jimmy is going to win that fight against his bully? What do you think? I would say the answer is no. There is no guarantee. Okay, it puts him in a better position, but really there is no guarantee. There are a couple of things that are at play here, right? Maybe Jimmy doesn't feel comfortable in a setting outside of his studio, outside of his dojo, or whatever the venue we'll call, right? We'll call it just studio. Maybe little Jimmy doesn't feel comfortable with that. Maybe little Jimmy is a rock star on the mat, but maybe when it comes to a real fight, now things feel a little bit different. Now that could go into it. All right, well, Jimmy goes, well, crap, this person's not following the rules. He's throwing things. He's grabbing. He's scratching, right? He's kicking in the groin, right? So that right there is one of those things that maybe little Jimmy did not get a whole lot of in his studio, in whatever sport that he was learning it in, or how to fight in. Right, here's another thing too. Maybe this little kid is not, obviously he's probably not, this kid that is bullying him, he's not going to fight clean. He's probably going to be dirty, right? He's probably going to grab things and throw it at little Jimmy. He's probably going to try to sucker punch him. He's probably going to do things that little Jimmy might not be used to in that sport atmosphere. Okay? Now, just a little bit of a side story here. A good martial arts school will go into real life scenarios as well. But let's assume that wasn't the case with our subject here. So now the question is, well, does he know how to handle that? Does he know how to handle being sucker punched? Does he know how to handle being surprised and being held in the chokehold when he wasn't expecting that? Right, these are all questions that we can answer as, well, yeah, this obviously means that there is no guarantee that little Jimmy will do well with this 2 years of martial arts training or boxing training, and whatever sport you want to pick, and apply it to a real fight. But will he be in a better position to defend himself? He will be in a better position to defend himself versus him really not having any formal training. Okay. So now let's say little Jimmy went a different route. Maybe the parent was like, I don't like sports. I don't like Taekwondo. It's stupid. It's not realistic. But, maybe the dad goes, I've been in a lot of street fights. I do MMA, right? And the dad maybe goes, I know what it's like to be in a real fight. I've done things where I have learned the skill of street fighting. So rather than teach my son how to do these fancy kicks that are not really going to serve him in a real scenario, I'm going to teach little Jimmy how to do that from the beginning. And so maybe Jimmy's little lessons on top of a proper jab, proper cross, proper stance, how to protect his face, on top of doing those basic fundamentals that the other sports will also teach him. Maybe on top of that, the dad is also going to teach him, hey, here's also what you're going to do. You're going to create distance by throwing a kick, any kick, as long as it's forward and pushing. Don't aim for the face. That's a waste of time. Aim for the waistline and below. Create space. After you've created space, maybe run away, right? Or after you create space and you're against the corner, now you go for the face. Or now you grab. Now you throw. You grab, you grapple, you throw him against the wall, and then you run away. Now, this kid, now is learning street fighting from a person who knows how to do that, right? So now little Jimmy learns how to do a street fight. But let's say little Jimmy goes, hey, you know what? I've done a lot of street fighting with my dad. This is how he's taught me. And now let's say little Jimmy is again in that hypothetical scenario. A bully comes along, tries to mess with little Jimmy, with our subject. The question is, now that Jimmy has had, good mentoring, good training with his dad, who is a street fighter, real life, real fighting, is Jimmy in a better position to handle that fight? Absolutely. Is he in a better position than the previous example of, a year's worth of training of Taekwondo versus a year's worth of training of street fighting skills? Absolutely, he's going to be in a better position to handle that street fight than if he had done Taekwondo or boxing for that year. Okay? Now, they're both sets of skills are going to give him some advantage, but the street fighting is probably going to be a little bit more of an edge for our subject here. But now let's say, okay, well, damn, little Jimmy did pretty well. Still doesn't guarantee that he's going to do well, by the way, but he's in a better position to handle that bully than if he had just learned how to do sports. And now let's say little Jimmy signs up for a basic karate or boxing tournament. Not MMA, but just boxing or like karate, specific rules, right? He signs up. How's little Jimmy going to do? He just learned how to do street fighting. He could probably handle himself in the streets. How is little Jimmy going to do in a sport venue on the mat? Maybe not all that great. The rules are not going to be there. Maybe Jimmy's going to do things that are not going to be acceptable in the sport. So that's kind of the analogy between real protection training and sport protection training. Okay, so now let's tie that in with our dogs. People like to say, and I'm not sure why, it's got to be pride or it's got to be ego, but a lot of people like to say one of two things. They'll say this thing right here. They'll say, "Ups, I don't do protection sports. It's stupid. Protection sports are a waste of time. I want real thing. I want my dog to bite for real." And now, not every protection sport is the same. Okay, it really is not. And I hate to say this, IGP people, I'm sorry, but IGP, it is probably the most predictable protection sport there is. I've seen very soft dogs do decent and well in IGP. I've seen IGP3 dogs that, in terms of hardness, in terms of toughness, they're okay, but they're fairly soft. Not like puddles that they're gonna melt. But the thing is, IGP is a very predictable sport. Now, I have nothing against IGP. People love IGP, formerly known as IPO in Schutzen. So people love that sport, and it's awesome. It's a great sport. But it is a sport that is so predictable in the sense of the dog knows that it's definitely a sport. Now, the other sports are the same way, by the way. Okay, but there are sports where the scenarios are a little bit more realistic. I'm not saying they're realistic. Nothing compares to real life training, but you know, I'll just flat out tell you, what I do. I do PSA. And if you watch my videos, you've probably noticed that all of my videos or most of my videos are PSA in terms of protection training. Okay, now in PSA, we do have a bite suit sport. And we do have a predictable element to the sport to a degree, right? Then we have surprise scenarios. But the thing with the difference between protection training, real protection training, and sport training is that if the dog does protection sports, and that's all he does, whatever sport you want to choose, okay? But especially IGP, a very predictable sport. But if the dog just does sports, and then you put him in a real life scenario, the real life scenario meaning maybe somebody breaks into your house. Now think of the biting, okay? The biting that this dog was taught to do protection sports. The biting is the fundamental. That's the basic. That's the equivalent of the jab analogy that I gave earlier. So the dog is learning how to bite, how to either pull if it is IGP, or how to go forward and push into the bite with a full grip. Okay? That is the fundamental. That is the basic. The dog is learning how to do damage. The dog is learning how to use its mouth to make contact with the person. Now, if a real scenario happens, is this dog in a better position to handle that scenario than if it hadn't had any protection training? The answer is obviously yes, he's in a better position. Okay? He at least knows how to bite. But there's a guarantee that this dog is going to do well? Absolutely not. Okay? Because just like in our example with little Jimmy, maybe Jimmy did well in the mat in the studio, but in a real fight, no rules, suddenly Jimmy goes, crap, I'm not used to this. Same thing could happen to the dog. The dog could go, well, what do you mean you're breaking into the house? I don't understand. What are you talking about? You're not presenting. Where's your sleeve? What's going on here? Why you're not presenting? There's no sleeve. Where's your padded stick? Where's your clatter stick? Right? Where's the field? So you have scenarios like that typically sports don't have. PSA does have some of these elements, by the way. PSA in the higher levels, you are going to be sending your dog in a close room. There are carjacking scenarios. And I'm not saying this to tell you that PSA is better than any other sport. I'm just telling you some of the elements to PSA that some of the other sports don't have. So we're back to, does that sport dog, will he do well in a real scenario? He has the basic skills to bite, but he has probably not been taught the reality of a real scenario. He hasn't gone through the reality of a real scenario, right? To go from a person that is passive to in a split second charge and jump at you, right? To go from an open field to now you have a person closing into your space, breaking into your house. That's an element that is not normally there. So like I was saying earlier, back to my point, people like to say one of these two things. I don't like to do sports. I like real training. Sports are a waste of time. Okay? And they'll go, no, sports, no, we don't do sports. I do for real, like real life training. And then they look down on sport dogs. They're like, that's just a sport dog. It's not going to do well. Now, some sport dogs will live up to that. They'll go, yeah, I'm just a sport dog. I'm not going to bite anybody for real. But some sport dogs will tear you up. They'll just flat out send you to the hospital. Okay? Because it is based on character also. And then you have some people that go, oh, my sport dog can totally do that. And they'll go, yeah, my sport dog, he's a level 3, pick whatever sport, right? My sport dog is a level 3 or level 2. He can definitely do a real scenario. And they'll go, hey, I'll bet you money, stand out there without a sleeve, without anything. I'll send my dog on you, and I guarantee you he'll bite you for real. And so you have, people that go, oh, sport dogs will do great. They're great. And then the people that will say, no, sport dogs are not going to do great. Real life is real life. That's completely different. But what they're both right. They're really, in a way, they're both right. And in a way, they're both wrong. Okay? You need to think about the difference between a sport dog and a real protection dog, not as in black and white, but think of it as it really depends. It really, really depends on the dog. It's going to go to character. Because here's the thing. There are dogs that will not get any training at all in protection. They will not see a sleeve their whole lives. But some dogs are going to be good, real protection dogs without any little bit of training, without one seeing a sleeve or a tug. They'll just do well in a real life scenario. Somebody breaks into a house, that dog without a single day of protection training will tear that guy up. This is character. This is temperament. Okay, this is flat out temperament. That's how it is. There are dogs that will do that without any little bit of training. Okay, they'll handle a real life scenario much, much better. Okay, without formal training. And if we want to tie that into our human analogy, you're going to have some kids, some people that even without any formal training in boxing or martial arts will handle themselves decent in a real fight. And some people obviously need the training. So that is the difference between sport protection training and real protection training. Okay, so if I'm going to do sports, I am going to train that dog for the end in mind. So the end in mind for this sport dog is going to be the trial field. So I'm going to look for precision, and I'm going to look for the most points that I can possibly get. And I'm going to look at that, and I'm going to base my training all the way from the fundamentals, from the basics. And I'm going to always keep that in mind. So what are we looking for? Full push grips. Awesome. So that's one area that I'm going to spend a lot of time in. What else are we looking for? We're looking for, nice firm grips, not like chewy grips, nice firm grips. So we're going to spend a lot of time doing that and encouraging that for the rest of that dog's life if it's going to be a sport dog. What else are we looking at? We're looking for a beautiful, just popping out, right? What else are we looking for? Depending on the sport, we're looking for a bark and hold, or an out and guard, silent guard, whatever the case might be. Is that something that's going to be useful in a real scenario? Maybe not. Maybe, but maybe not. So if I'm going to be training a sport dog, I'm going to be spending a lot of time in those areas because we're doing sports to get the most amount of points. Now, if I'm going to train a protection dog, which I have, yes, we are going to spend time on the bite. And we want that dog to have a nice, strong jaw, and we want that dog to learn to bite certain targets. But I'm going to focus more on scenario-based training for that dog, right? So I'm going to focus more on the defensive aspect of protection training for that dog. I'm going to put that dog in various scenarios, like break-in scenarios, carjacking scenarios, right? Guy at the ATM scenarios, person talking to you, and then the next second later they're charging at you scenarios. So a lot of the training is going to be similar in that there is going to be biting, there is going to be protective equipment for the person, for the decoy, and we will do some civil agitation, which just means, no equipment fixation on the dog. There are going to be maybe even, not maybe, but very, very likely there's going to be muzzle agitation scenarios where the dog will be put in a situation where it will go towards the decoy. Decoy's not wearing equipment. Okay. So I'm going to be looking at all these things because those are the scenarios that I want to prepare this protection dog for. Okay. I'm going to do even things like, hey, based on my tonality, based on the handler's tonality, the tone of voice, based on the handler's demeanor, that we can even turn into a cue. Okay. So those are things that I would focus on real protection dog. Now, does that mean that this dog that is doing real protection work, does that mean that this dog will be a lousy sport dog? If that dog has no preparation, yes, that's exactly what it means. But if that real protection dog has some preparation, meaning maybe once a week, this person takes that dog to the local sport club, and they are also training for certain rules, they're also training for certain sports scenarios. Now the dog is learning, or maybe has learned the basics of protection training, but it also is doing sport and is familiarizing itself with the sport arena. Okay. Now, will that dog do well in a trial, in an event, because it is getting that preparation? Yes, absolutely. Okay. Now let's take that to the flip side. If I'm going to be working a protection sport dog, yes, I am going to be focusing on all these little things that are going to give me the most amount of points, just like I mentioned earlier. But does that mean that this dog is going to do well in a break-in environment? You don't know. You really don't know. Now, does that mean that this dog is going to do well in a carjacking environment? Depending on the sport, maybe not, right? If you do PSA, dog's going to do pretty well, very likely, because even in the PDC, we're already doing a hidden sleeve carjacking scenario. But the other sports don't do that. So, again, depending on the sport. So, is this sport dog going to do well in a break-in scenario? You don't know. That's based on character. And, training too. Not just character, but also training. Is the dog going to do well in a carjacking scenario? You don't know, because it's a sport dog. It hasn't seen that. Is that dog going to do well in a scenario where you go from talking to him to charging at him? Again, depending on the sport, you don't know that. Okay, but what if that sport dog also does some real base scenario training on the side, right? Or maybe once a month or so, this person does some break-in scenarios, occasionally, maybe once a month, maybe less frequently than that too. Now this dog that does pretty well in sports, now this dog could potentially handle real break-ins in a much better manner, because it's already seen that picture a few times. So it really depends on the dog, and it really depends on how many different pictures this dog has seen. Okay, and it's the same thing with patrol dogs, with the police dogs. You're looking at the police dogs in the same manner, right? A lot of people kind of knock on the police dogs because they're like, police dogs don't know how to out. Police dogs, they have terrible bites. They don't target well. They don't have full mouth bites. And yes, I get it. The turnout for the turnaround for police dogs from the company procuring the police dog, training the police dog, and giving it to the handler. That's a much shorter period of time than the time that a protection sport dog is going to go through before it trials. Okay, you're talking about one of these companies getting one of these green dogs, training it, pairing it up with a police dog. By the time it goes in the street, depending on the age of the dog, depending on the team, this dog could be in that company for like maybe 5 months or even less, and then in about 4 months or so, 5 months, already be on the streets. Maybe longer. Okay, I'm just giving you kind of a quick window here, but I've seen that. They go from Europe to the company. They're in the company for about 4 or 5 months, and then after that, they're paired with their handler, who goes to a few weeks depending on the company. It could be anywhere from a couple of weeks to like 8 weeks of training with that handler. Now, after that, that handler is on the streets with this dog. Whereas a protection sport dog, you're probably going to spend a little bit more time. You're probably not even working with a green dog. You're probably working with a young dog. So you're not working with a 2-year-old dog. You're working probably with a younger dog, and you're probably going to spend a little bit of extra time before you take him to the trial. So that's the thing. That's the main difference. It really boils down to preparation and temperament. Okay, so to wrap it up, protection sport dogs can do well in real life scenarios depending on how much preparation they've had. Real protection dogs, not sport, but protection dogs, and I'm just saying real versus sport because that kind of seems to make a nice distinction there. So protection dog, like personal protection dogs, can do well as sport dogs if there is preparation. Okay, and police dogs, they're police dogs. They're not really competing. They're doing demos, and they're out doing the real thing. And in general, yes, sport dogs do look better. They do look flashier. They out nicer. They have better grips. Okay, they're fuller. They're calmer. Versus when you see a police dog or a protection dog that has to be in a real scenario, their bites are not always full. They're not always pushing into it. Sometimes the target is a little bit off, and they'll just bite whatever is available, which is exactly what they're supposed to do. Bite whatever is available, and the out is not always clean. You're not working with a compliant decoy. You're working with a decoy that is probably going to be fighting your dog the entire time. They're going to be screaming. That's a whole nother element of drive into the picture. So it makes the dog much more driven, and much less likely to comply to an out when the decoy is screaming, hitting the dog, making these high-pitched noises. So yes, in general, the protection sport dog does look cleaner, does look better, because the trainers are spending they're spending months and months of diligent preparation so they can get as many points as possible. Think about that. The protection dog that doesn't do sports, they're not getting that. They're only getting maybe like a few bites here and there just to kind of keep them fresh, getting a few bites a month. The police dog, they're getting training, but they're getting training with the other police officers from the department who are not typically dog trainers, and they're doing it with very limited equipment. So, yes, the protection sport dogs do look better. So a lot of people have this little bit of a rivalry where people go, oh no, sport dogs are better. Police dogs are crap. Sport dogs look way better. And the quote unquote real protection dogs, they're just crappy dogs. And then people on the flip side kind of make similar arguments. That's just a protection sport dog. That's just a show dog. That's not a real dog. A real dog is it's gonna be dirty, and it's okay if they're dirty. So there's this little bit of a rivalry when people sort of don't understand that it is about the temperament of the dog, and it is about how many times each dog has seen the different pictures. Okay? But anyways, that's pretty much it. Hopefully that answered your question. Thank you for the suggestion. It was a great topic. I can certainly expand on it a little bit more at a later time, but we're going to wrap it up on this one for now.